with that, and I'd like to move there's another amendment. Isn't there a... Yep. Where's the... Sorry, I thought I'd read the amendment somewhere. We rather than dealing with this amendment, with this motion, I'd like to move that we refer the draft submission on the bill back to the submissions panel for the panel to determine the final form of the submission to be made on behalf of the council, and that the mayor and well, actually, I don't know whether other staff, but and that we request that the hearings be that the select committee conduct a hearing in Christchurch, in which case the council will be represented by myself. I don't know who else particularly wants to appear on this matter. Ali Jones, represented by the Mayor and Councillor Ali Jones, along with appropriate expert staff, because we want a really powerful submission made. This Royal Commission occurred in our city, and we want the learnings that have come from that to be reflected in the legislation that is passed. So, and if not, then I think at least by the Mayor and appropriate expert staff. If we have to go to Wellington, we'll have to go to Wellington, but otherwise we'll seek to have it here. So, and actually we don't need the words "in which case," because the council to be represented by the Mayor and Councillor Jones along with appropriate expert staff. But you might have to drop off, Ali, if it's an airfare to Wellington. Okay. Thank you. So do you want to just quickly run through the main points that you think that we should be covering in the submission? Because I think we highlighted the other day that we really do want a strong submission.
Thanks. I won't go too much into the background. We know how we've got here. Where we've moved to from a discussion on Monday is to flesh out the main points from the Royal Commission recommendations. They made 25 recommendations to the government. Of those 25, up on the screen for us are the main 10. And indicated on the right-hand side where we see those recommendations being supported or not by the bill. So to quickly run through those, in terms of retaining the 33% new building standard for earthquake-prone buildings that was recommended by the Commission, has been replicated in the bill. The recommendation for unreinforced masonry buildings, particularly with hazardous features, to be strengthened to up to 50% of new building standard. That's a recommendation made, hasn't been reflected in the bill. So our submission contains a recommendation that is looked at again. The time frames that the Commission set for priority buildings has been recognised to some extent, as the bill has a mechanism for prioritising buildings that will be set into regulation. We haven't seen the detail around that yet. Commission also recommended time frames for strengthening to be set nationally. That's been recognised in the bill. Exemptions is the recommendation that's been recognised. Information about building risk is publicly available. That has been recognised. The Commission also recommended that when building consents are granted, they should be done so without triggering upgrading to accessibility issues. So accessibility is the building code word for making sure that buildings are able to be used for people with disabilities. So accessibility and means of escape requirements. So that was a recommendation from the Royal Commission to the government that that upgrading trigger isn't activated by a building consent to do seismic capacity increasing work. There is going to be some guidance provided, however, we don't know the detail of that yet, around how that mechanism may work. We discussed that at some length on Monday. Also the requirement that the TAs can adopt policies to require hazards in residential buildings. This is what the Commission put up to the government. That hasn't been reflected in the bill. At the time of initial consultation, the Council supported the Commission's recommendation.
No, we didn't. Not on that one.
Some key issues out of those for us when we move with our submission is around particularly unreinforced masonry buildings with what we see as high hazards, decreasing time frames, being able to address those high hazards as quickly as possible. So we're submitting on that aspect and the aspect of requiring higher strengthening for those high hazard areas, parapets and the like. For the prioritisation of buildings, the recommendation in terms of the Royal Commission identified this, the shorter time frames with that higher increase. We can see that the Council's submission supported that, and the legislation that we have, the bill, isn't quite clear on how that is going to be activated. There is an aspect of the devil in the detail there with those regulations. We want to enforce that, our view on that with our submission.
Yeah.
In terms of strengthening, a consent for strengthening work activates other upgrading work. So the Royal Commission talk there in terms of Section 112 of the Building Act triggering other upgrading work. That shouldn't happen. Whereas our previous submission contended that that upgrading work is equally as important as the structural upgrade. The bill contains the provision that it may not require that additional upgrading, but there is some tools to be delivered via regulation as to how that will be balanced out. In terms of the bill contains 4 regulations that will be set in terms of tools that we use to clarify these issues. We do get asked or provided with consultation facility on some, but not all. Is that one?
Yeah, at the moment the bill's drafted so that there's only a specific requirement to consult with the councils on the seismic capacity assessments. It appears we're not necessarily going to be consulted on what's a priority building, the criteria for exempting buildings, and on this aspect. So we'll need to include that in the submission.
Yep.
That we should be consulted.
Yep.
In terms of the methodology and cost for seismic capacity assessments, The Commission didn't address this issue. Our previous submission moved along the line that we need to be able to recover costs from dealing with the associated work, and also we've raised issues around where the obligation falls back to the council to deal with the building. How is that cost recovered? The bill itself doesn't address those issues, and while we have existing procedures for recouping some costs, in terms of doing immediate work, our view is that these recovery mechanisms aren't fast enough. Do you want to mention anything about it? No. Heritage buildings. The Commission recommended the immediate securing of dangerous buildings, that they shouldn't be impeded by the requirements to deal with the regulatory process. Our submission previously supported that heritage buildings should be preserved and retained wherever practicable, and the benefits of heritage protection should be balanced over the safety concerns. The bill provides that Category 1 historic buildings under the Historic Places Act may apply to the council for an extension of up to 10 years to complete any seismic upgrading work. As part of that extension process, there is an obligation for the owners to manage the risk. Once again, this is a scenario where some regulations or criteria are going to be formed as part of the bill and provided back to the council. Thanks.
That's great. Well, I mean, I think that with the motion that we refer this back, you know, can I just thank everyone for, you know, the tremendous work that you did in a very short space of time to present to us the different stages, because I think with that additional stage of the advice that the council gave to MB when they did the original discussion document has certainly enabled me to get a much clearer picture of the consistency of the position that the council has adopted throughout. But I think that it's our obligation as the Christchurch City Council to present very strongly in support of the Royal Commission recommendations. It's, you know, I think we owe it to the people whose lives were lost and who were severely injured when buildings collapsed in the earthquake. So it is something that I think we have an obligation to take on. So thank you very much for all of the effort you put in. And if there are no further questions or comments, I would like to look for a seconder for the motion. Phil Clearwater seconded the motion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very, very, very much. And as I indicated, we're going to have to adjourn the meeting and come back. Well, I was thinking 3 o'clock, but just to give us the time that we need to deal with other matters. But if people like, we could go back and complete. I mean,